So, Casey, technical difficulties aside, man, go ahead. Let's pick up where we were when we ended our conversation at my office.
So the big thing you mentioned, there are no coincidences, and that immediately, it got me on the whole, what is called synchronicity, and that kind of leads me into that whole area of, the psychedelia, and really where my whole life began to take notice of those things. And I can't jump right into that right away without going into context of really where it all began, which was when I was about 16. I started getting really interested in Western philosophy, the big three: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and a lot of that just kind of pushed me into this mentality of, particularly Plato's forms. He talked a lot about, you can't really, your whole reality is subjective. You're going to...
Let me pause you right there, because I have to ask before we go too far. What got you into that? What sparked it?
What got me into just the philosophy aspect?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What opened the first book for you? What was it?
So, without it sounding cliche, it was really having a really extreme version of life compared to most people I was surrounded by. I mean, the school I was attending, you can't obviously know what everybody's going through, but I was in this situation, growing up where my parents were heavily addicted to drugs. Hard drugs, methamphetamine, and they kind of it was a 2-story house. They live in the bottom, and my grandmother lives up top, and my grandmother was kind of the guiding light for me and my sister both, while my family underneath was going through all of this shit. And it's going through that dynamic and seeing all these crazy episodes unfold and take off, and I'm like, man, is this how life is? And I'm going to school my whole life like that, never bringing any of that up because I'm not processing it.
What ages was that you were going through this situation?
All the way from probably ages 5 all the way up until 20 years old.
Yikes.
And so my whole childhood, it's sort of how do you even begin to fathom that? What do you do about it? And then I start getting to that age where you're going over to your friends' houses, and then all of a sudden you get a different perspective. You're like, this family operates way more different.
Oh, man, is that a turkey on the table for Thanksgiving? Or what do you mean you guys are doing Christmas dinner?
Yeah, exactly.
Wait, at a what? A dining room table. Is it plastic? Does it fold?
Right.
Yeah.
No, yeah, all of that. And it was just the whole... That was really where I started to feel there's something going on here. And then as I got older, I started to really, just on the school topic, it's I became very unfocused in many regards to it, because I didn't care about what they were teaching me, because I'm dealing with, last night around 3 a.m, a bunch of strangers showed up to my house and went into the basement and shot up. It's I can't focus on your lecture right now. And then around the age of 16, I was in a library, and, I find those books and I start reading them, and what they're talking about just had this natural resonance with me. And
it's interesting. So you were about 16. This was a school library.
Yeah.
We're on your story, not my story, but just so that you know a little more about me, since we're having the conversation. I was about the same age, about 16, and it was my high school library, and I read Socrates. If I'm remembering it correctly, it was basically, there's nothing more natural than a squirrel eating an acorn, but
right.
That's a really violent act if you're an acorn.
Right, no, yeah.
And when you're 16 and you've never done thought experiments before, this was very challenging subject matter. This was a whole paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So, okay. You get into Western philosophy.
Western philosophy came first, and it was sort of this natural click, and I had already mentioned, Plato's forms, and his whole thing about that was, the analogy of the cave. When I talk about subjective reality, the people, the art depiction, it's people in the cave, and they see these shadows on the wall. Little do they know it's a bunch of people behind them doing the shadow puppets, and until one day, one guy decides to stand up and he finds the tunnel, and he's going through it, and he comes out on the surface, and he's looking at this entire reality that is the real reality, but he has no conception of it. And that really started to push me in this direction of, man, is the way I'm living, like with school, the family dynamic, the relations I have with people, is this really what's there? Is this what I should be focusing on? And you go through all the opinionated structure of the curriculum saying you need this, and that whole idea of success is being beaten into you from, I mean, just not in high school, but from a very early age. And, tons of people, I think, are becoming very adamant about this subject about, well, is this really the right path? Is this...
So what I see in America, and it's relevant to tell people that you're 24 years old, what I see is that each generation, starting with who's got the torch right now, starting with old white guys ruling the world, right? Coming down, each generation, the younger you go, the more I see them starting to challenge the old ways.
Yeah.
And it's not just a juvenile thing, general rebellion. I don't want to do what society tells me. I don't want to do what my parents tell me. It's like genuinely challenging the system, right? All the marches we've had lately, people are really involved. They're physically getting out in the street and marching. That's cool to see right now.
I agree with you that as time has gone on, we have been allowed a greater... what's the word I'm looking for? We've been given a greater comfortability to go out and do that now without really strong, resistance, so to speak. I mean, you think about some of the topics that can just be talked about now, and you go back 40, 60 years ago, and that's
big no to talk about it.
Even in places today, you still risk death sentences and so on. And I mean, that's an extreme level, but I mean, there are still areas of the world where you can suffer very crucial punishment.
Put it in perspective. Are we talking about in America, or are you just talking about beliefs in general across the globe and what's accepted?
Yeah, across the globe, because I think in the United States, and particularly just about any first world country, you're experiencing a level of living that many people worldwide will not experience. And I'm not talking about in the sense of just third world countries, but ultimately, I want to try and connect this all together, but going back to that whole comfortability of thought, we have to sometimes take a step back and really observe what you're allowed to think. Whether it's the most obscure idea, abstract, or...
Allowed by who? Are you talking about the
merits of
social
society
contract that we have?
Yeah, the social construct in general. And the reason I say that is because, anyone in this society, for example, can think just about anything, if not anything. Whereas in other places, you may not even have the ability to dream. You may not have the ability or environment to even allow the slightest bit of ambition. And a contrast on that would be, here it's a very common motto, work hard and earn it. There are people in other countries, and even in this country, that will work hard until they die and reap nothing of it.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's a truth that's eternal. It's always been that way. We don't have a segment in human history without slavery yet.
Right.
We don't have it. So you experiment a little bit with some Western philosophy. You do the tune in, turn on, drop out kind of mindset, leap over the hurdle, right?
Yeah.
So now you're a seeker. Now you got your mind open. There was something else you shared with me when we were talking about The Office. You had a moment of epiphany.
Yes, and that began with LSD.
Okay.
And so I'm going to go back and just touch on that philosophy just for one more second. So the biggest story that stuck out to me was Plato's work, The Apology, which involved his teacher Socrates. And long story short, it's all about a guy going in front of the jury, which ultimately symbolically is society, and he's saying, I don't believe anything any of you, from the highest authoritative stance to the lowest, has ever told me. And that one act got him killed.
Sure.
And his greatest quote, or what he's known for, Socrates, is, I know that I know nothing. And that's what began it all.
But the one thing you can never get away with, and history's proven this, is challenging the power structure.
No.
Not more than they allow you to make themselves look kind and gracious.
Well, it's a conflict of interest.
Sure.
And that is the big... So we can't talk about the the psychedelics without mentioning, we talked about him a little bit last night, Terrence McKenna. Terrence has this wonderful, and if I butcher the quote, forgive me, but he said, culture is not your friend. Religion is not your friend. Society is not your friend. Psychedelics break down this segregation and boundary. And he's not speaking poorly against culture or anything like that, but he's ultimately saying any inherent preordained belief system will always limit your vision on the possibility of everything. And that was, so before LSD, I was introduced to cannabis. And cannabis was sort of like this tumbling, no pun intended, weed across like this vast desert of possibility. And
how do you mean that?
So at first the first time I legitimately got stoned, it was this euphoric feeling, and I thought nothing else of it. It was just this.
What was the setting? What was it like? This doesn't sound like high school peer
right.
pressure.
No, right, exactly. I was actually way out of high school by this point. This was about 2.5 years ago. I was living with some roommates, a very cozy environment, and I was just in my room, and my friend comes in, and he's just like, "Hey, I noticed when you smoke, you're holding the smoke in your mouth. You're not actually inhaling." He's like, "Breathe deep down." So I did.
He called you Clinton.
Yeah, exactly. And so
this guy.
It finally hit me, and I got this euphoric relaxation come over me, and that was all it was. But then, few weeks go by, and I'm introduced to the tool known as a bong, and so we put way too much in it for me personally. And
so from what age were you really a cannabis user?
21 to 22.
Okay.
And so I take this big ass rip, and I'm laying there on the bed.
On the moon?
Yeah, essentially. And I'm laying there, and my friend is next to me, and all of a sudden I feel the blood just all go to my face. And I just say, I just felt all the blood in my body go to my face, of course, exaggerating it. And I kind of stood up, and this was the first time in my life I experienced a panic attack. Okay. And I stood up, and I remember like walking out, and I was just saying things out loud like, I feel like I've been poisoned. I can't, like, I just couldn't process anything, and I was kind of freaking out. But then my friend, one of my other roommates, he grabbed my hands, and he's just like, "Casey, calm down. Relax, like, you're fine." And
your spirit guy.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, truly. And he calmed me down, and then the first real psychedelic experience unfolded for me. I go back to my roommate's room where everybody's just hanging out, and I'm standing there, and I was talking to them, and then the weirdest thing happened. I would talk to them, and it would there was like a second delay behind my voice, but when they talked, it was in real time. And it was almost like I would say something, and then it would echo, and then they would speak, and it would just be like like how we're talking right now. And this really started like, I'm like, what is going? Yeah, I'm like, what is going on right now? And this lasted. I mean, I had no concept of time. Time just went away, and this was going on, and they were all like, "Man, I've never seen this before. He's just out of his mind right now." And so I sat down on the bed, and my friend, he had this Picasso painting on the wall, and I looked at it, and next thing I know, I am watching an infinite amount of stories take place in this painting, just getting different meanings.
Some good weed, bro.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Where are you getting this super weed? What is this stuff you got here?
Probably from Colorado.
Sounds like Wonka weed.
And it was definitely some magic herb of some kind.
Fell out of heaven, landed in Colorado, huh?
Yeah, literally. Okay. And that Picasso painting, like all the meanings were going, and then I remember I just sat there and I looked at my hand, and I just go, I think I'm back. Like completely sober.
Interesting.
And I think it's funny that I say I'm back as if I was somewhere else. It's like, man, I feel like I kind of strayed out, and that just went on for a while, and then I went through...
Well, let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
What do you mean went on for a while? Like, to be honest, even though you said you smoked for a year, the shortness of that stint surprised me. But then when you told the story, actually, it sounds like your first experience with really getting a high dose of cannabis was pretty bad. So how did you get a year out of that? Like, how did that sort of bad experience turned sort of good experience turned into a year.
It intrigued me. It deeply intrigued me because
Like you wanted to get the high right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, that was obviously a flip. Because
Get the high right, Aiden.
my friend telling me, calm down and relax. It's like, okay, I have to really control what's going on up here. The whole be aware of your thoughts, and because it can push you in so many directions. So as time went on, I was just smoking casually, like all the time. It was my lounging experience. It was my cup of coffee. It was
your whiskey after work.
Exactly. It was my routine, and most of the time it was just that happy-go-lucky stoner vibe. Like that's all it was. And then one night, I was just with two of my friends. I got pretty stoned, and I was laying there, and friend flipped on this super trippy psychedelic electronic music, and it starts playing, and next thing I know, I'm floating through the rhythm. And this was my first, music was fascinating stoned before, but this was where vibration and frequency was really pulsating out of everything. And next thing I know, I'm going into like this prophetic mode of how did it all start? Where did it all begin? I want to know. I became obsessive about this.
Okay, so to be clear for people listening,
Sure.
You had an epiphany.
Yeah.
You had a third eye opening moment, something like that. How would you describe it? Awakening? This sounds like a first-time curiosity and a bunch of pretty profound stuff.
No, yeah,
What album was it, and how do I get a copy on vinyl?
The name of the group is actually called Sfongle.
Say again now.
Sfongle.
Sfongle. No disrespect, Sfongle, but what the fuck?
They're fascinating, and
damn, that name made me literally have to blow my nose. Go ahead.
No, the name of the album actually was Tales of the Inexpressible, and which was so fitting because I had no way of expressing it. And but no, when you say, I'll have to give context for it because that was much later on, but when I think about the terms like awakening and having that third eye or your pineal gland popping open and all, like, it's almost, to me, it's like putting a finish line on an infinite path. It's like...
That's a really great quote. Okay, that's a really great quote. Let's just pause and unpack that real quick. Say that one more time.
Finish line on an infinite path.
Do you think that we do that a lot as people? We put finish lines so that we can feel like we've accomplished things?
Absolutely.
Right? Oh, we made it. And it's like, well, what defined made it, right? Here's an interesting one in my personal journey lately is there's that really cool song, Crowd Going Apeshit.
Yeah.
By the Carters. So this is Jay-Z, who we all know made it to being a billionaire, and then Beyonce, who is in her own right just incredibly successful and talented.
Sure.
So let's just say they're worth a couple of $1 billion together, but they were worth $1 billion together some years ago recently, and then $500 million before that, and they're just putting out a song called "I'm Glad We Made It." How many billion was the finish line? Is what I'm saying, right?
Right.
Like you get to turn down playing the halftime show for the NFL. Was that the finish line? Do you think we do that a lot as people?
Absolutely. I mean, and that goes back to that whole like merit of success thing. And I think it goes without saying, I mean, just on the topic of money, I mean, that's a really, I think at this point, it's actually really mundane because it's such a, it's like when everybody's trying to reach success in the same regard, the legendary aspect is gone. I mean, it goes without saying there's quite a fair number of people out there that are either millionaires or billionaires, and they may have all done it differently, but they're all reaping the same reward. I mean,
what do you think that is? Like, what is it in your mind? Because it sounds like it sort of offends you, and I get it because it sort of offends me too, but I'm just curious what your flavor of being offended looks like.
In terms of the money aspect?
Yeah, the filthy rich.
So, I'll use the body as an example. You can only consume so much that you can utilize. It gets to, I mean, you and I, we're both very familiar with the world of fitness, and we know that in order to reach a certain, we could say genetic limit, you can only consume so many nutrients and reach a genetic limit until you can start maintaining. Well, the thing about money or even power is that I very much believe there is a limit to it, but it also becomes irrelevant once you become desensitized to it.
You think the leaders become desensitized, or you think we're desensitized to how much power they have?
I think it goes both ways. I very much believe that, let's say we'll take well-known names, for example, Jeff Bezos, statistically the wealthiest man on the planet, estimated $180 billion. So you think about that number, any person, any millionaire could live the life they are living right now in an unfathomable amount of times over and over and over based on that. However, you take someone that could still be very, we'll just say financially poor, very, very poor. Okay. They'll have no concept of that. And when they...
But I'm not financially poor, and I don't have any concept of 180 billion.
Right.
And I understand what you're saying, and it doesn't distract from your point at all, but he's not really worth 180 billion.
Right.
That's whatever number they project out into the media. He's worth that, on a 10-year timeline, and if you sold all the equipment and, so these numbers that they throw out there, I don't know if they're throwing them out to you and me. I don't know if they're throwing them out to investors. I don't know if it's all a big commercial, right? Pay Fox 11 heads to run your numbers on the news. But I understand what you're saying. Just filthy rich?
Yeah, but I just don't think on the financial topic, I just think, symbolically speaking, there is a level of power depth that at a certain point you just have no grasp of anymore. And I don't even think you need money to have it. We can see that with, we can just call it ego. I always loved what Snoop Dogg said in the aspect of you can have a lot of money, but money doesn't buy cool. Money doesn't buy character.
That's right.
And I think we see that quite often with,
oh no, we see it all the time.
Yeah. And
there's not a politician that gets thrown on to the mainstream media for us to witness that isn't completely orchestrated, and they're all shitbags.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be pretty scummy to migrate to the top, period. You got to have a lot of closed-door meetings. You got to do some things maybe you and I, the general populace, wouldn't do. Do we all agree?
Yeah.
So I think anytime you're seeing one of those politicians on TV, you're seeing a shithead.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so I like what Henry Ford said. He talked about money doesn't change an individual. It'll only show you the potential of their character. Something along those lines.
Henry Ford backed the Nazis.
So
there's a painting of Henry Ford hanging behind Hitler's desk in one of Hitler's offices.
So without causing a lot of controversy, I think we can find respect, or great respect, maybe not admiration, but great respect in individuals who may be painted or are truly evil and villainous people. But
I don't know that Henry Ford was truly evil. I think that he was the beginning of the mindset that corporations have. He was going to make more money every month than he did the last month, no matter what. And he was going to find ways, even if he had to back both sides, to do that. And that's basically what he did in the war. He just made sure he survived by backing both sides. If you don't know that you might not be speaking German in a year, maybe it's smart to send some Jeeps over there, kind of thing. So even though it's not something that I would do, I don't look down on the guy for it.
Sure. No, well, I mean, what I'm trying to say in that regard is that you can take someone with a truly just heart and a truly evil heart, but if the methodology is the same, it's only a difference of morality.
Yeah, I mean, what's the difference between some of these religious leaders and, say, like an owner?
Right, exactly. And
I mean, truly, what they say goes, and some of it's pretty outrageous, but it's happening.
Right. And that goes back to... So I'll have to go back and on what we said, because it's definitely the big turning point. I have to jump back to my LSD experience.
I was hoping you would, sir.
Yeah, how that all ties in. So, Terrence talking about the breaking down of culture and all that good stuff. And when I took it in the beginning, we'll say 45 minutes in, Well, actually, before I took it, I had to psych myself up because I was still very naive, but I knew just enough to know if I go into this with fear, it will,
trip.
yeah, it will be hell.
Sure.
And so I amped myself up and I took it. 45 minutes in, I'm not really feeling anything. I feel normal, but then I walk up some steps and I just kind of feel this wave go over me. And I look behind me, look at the hallway, and it just breathes, pulsates.
What do you think you were seeing?
Seeing, truly no idea, but maybe a projection of, just the whole hippie talk on it, but like the universe was, it was speaking to me. It was, I'm actually listening to it.
You know what's really funny to me is people make fun of the stuff that they call woo-woo.
Sure.
And I'm not saying woo-woo doesn't exist. It certainly does. There's a lot of nonsense out there. There's a lot of palm reader bullshit, get fucked nonsense,
Sure.
right? But I don't think that anybody should look at the idea of being able to communicate with the energy of the universe and make fun of that. It only sounds hippy-dippy because we've assigned that phrases like that sound woo-woo and hippie. But if people really sat down and thought about how profound that idea is, that you could turn off your conscious mind and just kind of feel what's around you a little deeper, I don't know why anybody would make fun of that. It sounds really cool.
No, well, I mean, that's what Carl Jung was really big on.
Sure.
I mean, a lot of his stuff is considered pseudoscience because he was so heavily involved with Eastern mysticism. As well, his whole theory on the equilibrium of Western and Eastern society is completely based around that. It's essentially saying, like, to have great religion, you must also have great science. Like,
Sure.
they're synonymous with each other. But, then after that whole experience, like with the hallway, I walk outside and my roommate who is tripping with me, he's there, and for some reason, I feel like he's the only person that I can fully communicate with right now. And we had another friend there who wasn't under the influence, and it was very difficult to speak to him. In fact, when I was speaking to anyone else, my speech became very slurred, like I was horribly drunk. Like I just became completely speech impaired. But with my friend, easy. Not at all a problem. And
Well, you and I talked about it a little bit. If the human body, which science doesn't argue is on a frequency, maybe the psychedelics change that frequency a little bit. So somebody else tuned into the same station on the dial as you,
yeah.
you guys would have been vibing.
No, exactly. And that's more than likely exactly what happened. And I'm looking out at the tree line, and the first thing I notice is that, like, kind of like this tumbling mirage, this mirrored smokiness goes over the tree line, and it's nighttime right now, and the flower of life pattern, if you know what that looks like, starts pulsating out of all the trees. And
Did you know that pattern before you had this
yes,
experience? Okay,
absolutely.
fair.
And as it's pulsating out, I'm noticing that in the stars, the sky, practically all scenes of nature, this great geometric collage is happening. But in anything that was man-made around me, buildings, it did not exist.
So you're seeing a lot of geometry, you're not seeing anything man-made.
No.
Did you feel like it was an underlying structure that's always there, or are you
Yes.
seeing something new?
I believe it was in a way, I definitely believe I was seeing something new for the first time, but I believe it's always been there. It was kind of like looking into the wiring, the framework, the construct of everything that is around us. It was seeing the beams when all you've been looking at was the wall. And
What do you think it is? What's your gut feeling? What did it feel like?
I believe I was looking into a very incomprehensible work of, I'll call it, divinity. I was looking at grand architecture that we couldn't possibly conceive. Or at least I couldn't.
That's huge. That's heavy. I have questions.
Sure.
We're pausing for 1 second. You guys go ahead and talk. I have to go out that door for just 1 second.
Yeah.
Case, the reason I stop right there, and we don't even have to edit that out. Man, I have really kept up on my workouts lately.
Good.
I'm earning that poster. I'm earning do the hard things. And I took an extra heavy dose, like a double dose of pre-workout, just the allotted amount, but just right up to that maximum level. And boy, it really goes through you. But I wasn't going to miss a workout to film a show because 0 days off.
Training is very important.
Training's very important. You know how it goes. If we can do it in there, we can do anything out here.
Exactly. Definitely.
So, bother you if I vape?
No, not at all.
Cool. I'll try not to smoke up both cameras too bad. So here's why I had you pause right there, because you said divinity. I have so many questions before we move on.
Sure.
So let me ask you. First time you've ever felt the presence of divinity was in this moment?
No.
No. So then you're even more sure that this was what you consider the divine.
Well, when I actually went into this experience before, I was a complete nihilist. Like, I was
A literal nihilist?
Oh, yeah. I was very content with the idea that this could all be for fuck whatever, and we just here for it and whatever. But
Okay. Do you still entertain that possibility?
in some degrees, yes.
Like there's a chance we're important to us, but we're just so infinitesimally small compared to the universe that the overall feeling, if we knew the truth, was that we don't really matter?
I think the ultimate question, ending with what you just said, if it matters, is that's ultimately up to us to decide.
So you believe that, though, you're saying. Like, so it's not up to God to decide. It's up to us.
I don't think I'm qualified to speak for the entity or the possibility of it.
You're qualified to speak for Casey.
Yes.
Speak for you. What do you believe? I'm curious. And no pressure. Like, if you don't know what you believe, that's my whole life experience right now is saying, I don't know.
And I'm glad you asked that, because I'm definitely I kind of just want to loop it all into that. But I'm definitely not the first person to say it, but I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, there are maybe really two possible. Like, I know all the theoretical physicists have talked about, well, the infinite infinities. To me, that's just a waste of thinking power at this point. But
yeah, I've never really understood the point. Like, unless it's just entertainment value for them, or unless they use it in formulas in ways I understand, because I don't have a 210 IQ. I never really understood the idea of infinite, because who cares at that point?
Exactly.
It becomes a non-issue, right?
Precisely my opinion on it. But ultimately, the two possibilities are we are the only thing in existence, or we're not. And
what do you mean the only thing in existence? This reality that we know of, this tangible matter, our universe, our...
Correct. And I believe we live in a duality of, and some people would argue that duality doesn't exist, but I'm a very firm believer in it, in the aspect of, with it, it's sort of like we do live in a finite reality, but we have ideas and concepts that are infinite.
So you think this is base reality, but we can all just, as thinking minds, as self-aware beings, we can just agree on complex concepts like infinity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think, so when this experience really started peaking out is when, so I went inside with my friend, and we were just doing all the trippy shit, like, oh, look at the walls, look at the patterns.
Man.
Yeah, exactly. And then I went back outside, and I told him, like, hey, man, I think I just want to be left alone. He's like, you sure? This is your first time? I'm like, I got it. I'm good.
That's cool.
And so I'm out here, and this goes back to, in kind of in the beginning of your thoughts. If the awareness of your thoughts has a great deal of power. And I was a very firm believer in this moment, in hindsight, actually, that LSD was the proper psychedelic for me, despite all of my opinions.
So even though it happened kind of accidentally, you told me the first time, it's sort of a coincidence that the wrong stuff showed up and you tried anyway, something like that?
Yeah.
You feel like that was serendipitous, or maybe sort of predestined, like that was the right one for your personal journey.
Correct.
And it showed up.
Yeah.
There's the arrival.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it. And even if I don't fully understand it now, but when this started peeking out, I laid down on the deck and I looked up at the night sky, and there was this giant honeycomb pattern across the stars. And
I hear that a lot from ayahuasca users.
Actually, when I told a lot of people about my story after, they're like, did you do DMT? Are you sure that was acid?
Yeah,
and
you hear about the geometric shapes from DMT experiences.
And I'm kind of like reaching out at the stars, and then there's this face. Like a celestial face looking down at me. And it's not like super complicated, but the face is definitely there. And
masculine, feminine.
Masculine. And in fact, a mythological figure I compared it to was Odin.
Okay.
And because the right eye was missing, you could almost see like the beard structure and everything, and he was just looking at me, and he dissipated, and then there was a celestial face of my father, and I started thinking about my dad, and then my mom, then my sister, then my grandmother, and this whole family tree of stars was going through in the sky.
So you don't chalk this up to pareidolia. You're laying on your back, you're seeing stars, your mind forms patterns. Like this is an epiphany for you. This is a religious experience.
Yes, and to describe it as a religious experience is very accurate because I felt like these were very subconscious, buried issues releasing and being projected universally. And it was sort of like...
So you're seeing faces that represent things you're struggling with.
Yes. Yeah, like it was very much a turning the inside out.
Was this scary? Scary in a bad way? Scary in a good way?
No, not at all. There was no fear.
So you felt safe?
Yeah, very. I felt that I was being... when it had all ended and the family tree dissipated, there was a masculine face and a feminine face. And they kissed each other and then dissipated into like this giant collage of stars. And then it was like I felt this gentle seeping into the center of my chest. And I actually started having tears of joy and I started laughing hysterically.
That sounds pretty cool.
And then
and beautiful.
It was truly fantastic. And then as I was laying there, I noticed that the rustling of the leaves in the trees, all the insects, all the creatures of the forest, it all became one frequency. And surprisingly enough, the frequency of the universe and nature is 432 hertz. And some speculate that this frequency, like, correlates with the heart and the rhythm of it. And I believe, I can't remember when, it was like...
I thought the human body has the same frequency as the magnetic field of the earth, right? We're tuned to it
yeah.
as we live on it. Is that what you were saying, the 430?
I'm not too sure about that, but I do know that there was a period in time where all instruments musically were tuned to 432 hertz. And that changed later on in history. I don't know when, though, but as this all happened...
Recently. In the 90s, by the way.
Yeah.
It was really interesting. Not to get on a sidebar, but it was fantastically interesting when this happened to me. Music was very rhythmic in the 90s. I think that's why there's so many classics out of that period, even though the songs are kind of tacky. You know, there's these certain ones we all still kind of groove to. Yeah. Everything was still really rhythmic then, and it was like the late 90s when a dorm roommate of a good friend of mine was in musical theory at Cal State Long Beach, and she was talking about how everything was getting ready to change, how it's going to feel off-kilter to us. It's not going to be so rhythmic and beautiful and melodic, that music's going to go kind of choppy on purpose.
Clap tracks.
Sure, something like that, right? Because they're trying to do something new. They're trying to do something different. It's like the fashion you see on the runway that you can't buy in the department stores because it was fucking awful, but they're just trying something new.
Right.
Push the boundaries, find the edge of the map, that kind of thing. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, though, that they changed music, that there was a push, that there were plants in production companies to go out there and change that rhythm because it keeps people disrupted, distracted, upset, because it's rhythmically not good for them, or in frequency and hertz, however that music comes through and interacts with our physical body. They say there was a push to change that. Is that where you're going with that?
No, actually, but I can talk forever on those particular theories because, you know, whether it's rhythmically beautiful or not, I mean, we are stimulated emotionally by tone. And that's why music, I mean, it's very rare, I think, or even hard for me to believe that pop music can really invoke such
feeling wanton desire to molest children like Britney Spears. And I don't really get that tween music myself either.
Well, you'll get the whole like, oh, this is a bop or this is a vibe, and I'm like, all right, sure, but
what level of pop music though? Because I think Drake considers himself pop music and he's dope as shit.
Well, see, and that's the other thing. Like, I think there's a big misconception. Like, I used to be one of those kids that was like, oh, modern music is just fucking terrible. Well, the reality to me is that you just got to look. Don't listen to the mainstream. Don't listen to what they're just popping on the 20-minute radio. Yeah. Like, just dig. Yeah, absolutely. Like,
you do the online virtual version of go to the record store and dig through milk crates.
Absolutely. And that's how
some good stuff out
I
there.
have found incredible music that is made in the past even 5 years, 10 years, and I love it. But as this was all peeking out, I stood up, I look over, and I see the forest line, and the first thing I do is I take the most exhilarating piss of my life. Because when you're tripping on acid, you want to drink water, a lot of it. And so I'm doing that, and afterwards, I'm just kind of starting out, just enjoying everything, and I look up, and it's like this weird bronze, what's the word I'm looking for? It starts with an onyx color is going over the night sky like this, like these fingers are trying to pull something back. And it almost in my head, it's sort of like are you ready? Okay, you're ready. Here you go. And it pulls back, and I look down, and I see this giant crystalline kingdom in the forest wall. And
when you say kingdom, what do you mean? Instead of a tree, what are you seeing?
I am seeing a fully scaled to measure city of a material that almost looks like it, not chrome per se, but almost like a liquid silver, a liquid starlight, just a mirage of this deeply beautiful platinum silver. We're talking gray.
Damn, that sounds cool. And you're seeing this clearly.
More real than real. Like, it was vivid in every way, and then I see entities emerge out of it. Hundreds of them. And they're humanoid. They almost look exactly like us, except that they are made of a material representing the same color of this city, which is, it's hard to fathom, like seeing the outlines of a color on the same color. And they were all covered in these very intricate, beautiful designs all over their body. And they had sets of 4 eyes, solid black, not like demonic or anything. And they locked eyes with me. And as soon as they locked eyes with me, us, they, them, I, we, everything, memory, did not exist anymore.
Time, space.
It was the whole everything and nothing, an infinite second that happened. And
so why was it? You told me when we talked before at my office that it felt like a profound experience, which obviously it sounds like it was, obviously, but more profound after the moment you locked eyes with this entity that you're seeing. And you said that they seemed shocked to see you.
Yes.
Now, I've heard that before in ufology. I've heard that specifically in astral projections. And there's a special anybody can go watch. It's a TED Talks by a former manager of a department for the CIA. And I think that the clip is called ESP Real. And it's a TED Talk by this guy that headed up this like actual on paper existed in reality 20-year-long CIA program doing remote viewing. One of those guys, and I would want to brush up on this before I gave specifics because I don't like to give wrong information,
Sure.
But basically they viewed the similar entities to what you're describing on the moon, on the backside of the moon. And it was the weirdest description. The guy said they turned around and looked. They sensed him in the room. Even though he's not there, he's just astrally projecting because they were telepathic. And when they locked eyes, they were in shock. Everybody was scared of everybody. And then he was sucked back out of it. He lost focus.
Yeah.
Is that similar?
Well, I wouldn't say I lost focus per se. Well, I definitely lost focus of them because when I stared at them, when I felt that, oh, I don't exist anymore. When I came back from that, I dropped to my knees because it was seriously a what the fuck just happened. And I stood up and I looked back down and they were gone. Like the forest was still pulsating, all these geometric shapes, and snakes were coming out of the trees and reaching towards the sky and all of that, but they were gone. And I felt, I'm going to go back inside.
So we talked before, and you think possibly, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Sure.
But maybe what I described was that maybe your frequency was changed a little bit by the psychedelic that you were taking, and you were temporarily able to see or tuned into something else that's happening on this radio dial we call reality, right?
Yes.
We have one radio in our dash. There's different clear channels on it. They're distinctly different. Country music doesn't sound like talk radio, but they're all happening on this little dial.
Right.
Kind of like sometimes people see Confederate soldiers on certain places
Sure.
in the woods and battlegrounds. And do you think that's what happened, that you sort of saw a different layer of what's existing here now all the time?
It's either that, or for a brief moment, I was looking somewhere else. And it's sort of like
Astral projection somewhere
right,
else?
yeah. And the way you worded it makes me want to bring up this point. There are many substances on this planet that can affect our consciousness.
Yeah, there are.
And, you can put all the psychedelics on the table, and people will have, of course, different experiences. But me personally, I don't think the magic, because people talk about, shrooms made my body feel like this, or LSD made me feel like this, DMT or ayahuasca, and it's sort of like, I think they all go to the same source. You're making the same recipe, but you're just adding different ingredients.
So you're saying when our brain comes out of this reality, off this frequency, everybody's going to the same place, different paths to the same place. And even though the experiences are different, maybe they're all just looking in a different window of the same house. That kind of a feeling?
Yes and no. It's sort of like, I don't think we're all necessarily going to the same place, but I think we all reach a point in our mind where we just can almost unintentionally, intentionally blast off to these certain areas. I mean,
areas of what? Areas of your mind? Areas of reality, true reality?
Truthfully, I don't know.
But it was profound for you.
It was very profound. I mean,
like, you sensed truth. You sensed this is real. At no point for you is this a hallucination, a dream. You haven't fallen asleep. You're experiencing something different in reality.
Right.
Because of a psychedelic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a great story back to Terrence McKenna. Terrence visited some Asian country, and he was visiting a monastery, and he was going to an abbot, and he wanted to give the abbot DMT. And so the abbot agreed to taking it. He smoked it, and after his experience, Terrence asked him, "So, what was it like?" And the abbot responded, "Those are the lesser lights." The fact, now we have to be under
So it's like a crunchy way to see God?
Well,
it's God through dingy glasses kind of thing?
I don't know.
That's not how it's meant for us to get there?
Well, it's very possible, because considering most Buddhist, even Hinduism, a lot of Eastern practices, they don't indulge in any kind of substance entering the body. And it was just this idea that, under the assumption that this man had been sober his entire life, never taking any substance, he was able to reach a plane through a sober mind, and then gave a reference saying that to the most powerful psychedelic on the planet, giving it a reference point of lesser. I just find that very interesting. Whatever his intentions or purpose and what he was saying was, I have no idea. But
so this didn't feel lesser to you?
No, not at all. I mean, I just think everybody will have the opportunity to reach some kind of state.
If what? You're saying if they try what you tried, or if they just go out and have their own experience?
If they just go out and have their own experience. It just so happened that mine involved psychedelics. I mean, there are people who have never touched a drug in their life and have had near-death experiences and come back and say close to the same thing I am. And I mean, but when I went back inside, this is when I started to feel very uncomfortable. Because it was sort of like, in a manner of speaking, I just came back from the spirit world. Let's go see what's on TV. You know what I mean?
Right,
yeah,
right,
and
sure.
So I go inside, and our roommate, who didn't know we were tripping, gets home from work at about 2 in the morning, and all the lights are off, and we're just laughing. He comes in, and he's sort of like, "Man, what is going on?" And he's on the phone with his friend, and I'm hearing their conversation, and all of a sudden, I go into sensory overload, the most uncomfortable sensory overload I've ever been in. I mean, I am making connection to literally everything, every color shade, everything that's being said, everything is just connecting in me, even if I'm just pulling it out of my ass. Everything is just having a connection. And
now you're starting to sound stoned ape theory.
Right, exactly. I'm like, damn, this is a lot. What is going on? And then around 3 in the morning, our roommate, he's like, "Oh, you guys are tripping." Now it makes complete sense now. And he's like, "Hey, how far are you into Breaking Bad right now?" And my speech is coming back a little bit. I'm like, I'm actually on the
We're
last.
pretty broken.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm on the last episode of season 1, so it's the finale. He's like, you want to watch it? I'm like,
Oh, shit.
ooh, yeah, let's try. So we
Right.
go downstairs and we're watching it, and anyone who's seen Breaking Bad, the first season, the last episode, it's crazy. Like, it's a firefight and cartels and, like, all this shit's going on, and I'm just there like, I'm not scared, but I'm like, this is very intense.
Sounds
right.
heavy.
And then,
Sounds happy, bro.
so my friend who was tripping with me goes upstairs, and he passes out somehow. And he took 2 tabs. I took 1, but I go upstairs to see him. He's just sleeping on his bed. I'm like, well, damn, what am I supposed to do now? I'll try to go to bed. So now it's around 4:30 in the morning. I lay down on the bed, and I'm like, damn, I just cannot sleep right now. And then I get this little inner voice in my head saying, I need to go see my grandmother right now.
That's cool. Now,
So-
was that a little bit of guilt? Had you not seen her in a while? What's going on there? Like, where did that come from?
So it's actually really interesting you say that, because the whole time, and this is in hindsight, weed, I'm not blaming the substance by any means, but the whole time I was into all of this, I spent very little time with my family and most of my friends. It was just
How long?
about a year.
Okay, so about a
And-
year, you've just been on this personal journey.
Right.
Were
And
you journeying? Were you seeking? Or were you just getting high?
in the beginning, I was just getting high.
Okay, and then it turned
Towards
into something
the end,
more.
I was definitely seeking, because I firmly believe if my friend had never played that music, it would have probably never happened, and I would have just kept getting stoned at will. And
So something clicked.
yeah,
The clockwork clicked
Yeah,
over a gear.
it definitely did. And you know, so I grab my keys and I go outside, and you know, I think I'm done tripping. I see a little bit of snowflake patterns on the lights, but other than that, everything looks normal. Again, I'm like, oh, I'm fine. And I get in my car and I start driving. I'm going past all the buildings, and I'm seeing
Are you
all
driving, tripping now?
yeah.
That
and-
sounds dangerous.
it definitely was. But I felt like I was in complete control, and it's like, you know, it was kind of like the whole symbolism of he went off into the woods because I'm the only dude out here on the streets driving. There's nobody else, and
Joke's on you. You were in your driveway for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, literally,
With
yeah.
the windshield wipers going and the heater on.
no, yeah, it would have been a lot. Could have saved me, but so I get there, and it's about 5 in the morning now, and I go in there, and my uncle who was living there at the time and my grandmother, they get up and they're getting coffee. I go in there and I hug my uncle, and my uncle's just like, "Hey man, what's going on?" And I said,
Stoned.
"I dropped
That's
acid."
You tell your uncle this over morning coffee.
Yeah, and
Bold, man.
it
Honest.
no, like in this state, like, well, my uncle was completely like cool. I mean, he grew like the 70s and 80s. He was tripping all the time and whatever, and you know,
Is he an enlightened individual? Is he somebody who thinks open-minded,
he was
progressive, and good?
he was a kind person without a doubt. Like he
That's
was,
great,
and you know, my grandmother on the other hand.
You know, it's interesting if we could hover right there for a second.
Sure.
In doing this blanket evaluation of my life, you know, in this journey I've decided that I'm being really proactive about, I started looking at the people in my life that have a lot of worry, that are generally upset about stuff. It's all the people that think they have the right answer, no matter what that is, okay? Maybe it's because they're the leader of a religious organization, so we definitely have the answer, the only answer, the right answer, everybody else is wrong. They always seem really upset, and I don't know, just like this spirit. And they're the most judgmental people. I started to say like a spirit of unrest, which in the Christian realm, sound like you were familiar with this, but it's like when people hear the gospel because it's supposed to be the absolute truth. If their spirit's not in alignment with that, if they secretly disagree, you know, they're not good on
Right.
the inside, they get that spirit of unrest rubbing up against this powerful gospel, right? I kind of get that with the people that would be judgmental, that aren't the enlightened souls. Those are the people in my life, I realize, that are always telling me they have the answer. They definitely have it. The one, the answer. They
Right.
have it. It's those people. So it doesn't sound like your uncle's that dude.
No, not.
So you get to tell him at 6 a.m. over coffee that you're tripping LSD.
Yeah, and it was, well, my grandmother.
Teeth or not, I wanted to be there for that.
Grandmother took a different route, and you know, this became, you know, it goes back to that whole, oh, I'm done tripping, we're all good, I'm not that receptive to anything anymore. My grandmother she was going off on a little bit of a tangent, and I'm in this
Disappointed in you.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
And I'm in this state where I'm like trying to just like ground myself and bear myself, and this is where I'm like I'm fighting it. I'm not letting Lucy take me anymore. Like I'm not riding the current anymore.
You're trying to suppress it because somebody just threw a negative vibe at you.
Right.
Think about that. We live in a society where when a person is on a journey and they're honest with people literally in their family about that journey, and they just go, hey, here's what I'm experiencing right now. People want to fucking throw negative energy at you. Isn't that so weird that we're built like that? Here comes some judgmentalism. Here comes some like why I'm disappointed in you. And now just like take that negative energy and unpack that with your psyche while you're trying to move on in your journey,
Right. No, and the whole thing...
We're pretty rough on each other with that,
Well, it definitely was devastating. It wasn't so much in the moment. I mean, I'm sure it was in the moment. I just didn't process it until later, but I was going through and I was in the bathroom and I was looking at myself in the mirror, and
oh, I've heard that's a no.
Well, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it was great beforehand, but I completely forgot that LSD dilated your pupils.
Okay.
And I mean, I'm just chronic bug-eyed. I'm like, oh, no wonder she's kind of freaking out, and that was
You're like, how high am I? It looks like I'm missing a couple of teeth.
Right. Yeah. And I started to come down pretty hard, and
come down, or did it start to turn into a bad trip?
It started to turn into a bad trip.
And was the pivotal moment that bad energy in the kitchen, that judgmentalism? Okay.
Oh yeah, that was the turning point, and it was also returning to the home in which so much traumatic history.
Oh, that's fair.
Had ensued, and.
You getting high in the same environment you had a bad childhood. That seems dangerous.
Right.
How'd this go?
Not go well. So I'm trying to like go to sleep, and I'm tossing and turning, and I just cannot knock this. And so it's almost like 24 hours now. Because I mean, just from the day, not from tripping, but from the whole day beforehand, and then having tripping on top of it. Sure. So about 24 hours goes by, and it's in the afternoon, and I'm just getting angry and frustrated. And I mean, the drug is absolutely out of my system now, but it's sort of like I felt like nothing. Like I felt like my body and my mind and my spirit had just been eradicated, and I was left with that much left. It was like a violent birth. I mean, it was
ego
like,
death, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're driving at? I know you'd mentioned it before.
Sure.
Did it feel bad?
Horrible.
Really?
I mean, it...
At first or the whole time?
For a very long time.
Yeah. Hard to let go of, right?
Absolutely.
Everything we do is for ourselves.
And...
I want to look like this. I'm going to buy myself this. I'm going to wear this. And I'm going to bring children into the world. And like everything we do is for ourselves, right?
No, yeah.
Selfish.
Exactly. Exactly that. And, I went back home and I just started crying. Buckets.
Really?
Like...
Anything specific?
Oh, yeah. It was like acid was this skeleton key that's like, we're going to go to that vault, that gate where all of your darkness and demons are. And we're going to keep it open. And you can't shut it until you have the courage to go back to that door and empty it out yourself. And
you mean come back to that place on another high?
No.
You mean really deal with things?
Yeah,
so
really.
This was an epiphany. This was a realization. You got to deal with some things.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't realize that soon. And the first thing that's on my mind is I'm gonna smoke some weed and everything's gonna be fine. So I smoke. Feel anxiety I've never felt in my life before.
Your physiology is different at that moment, right?
Exactly. And I'm like, all right, that I got to calm myself down. That's not going to work. So then the next day I'm like, maybe a dab instead, just a tiny dab.
And tell, because not everybody knows what a dab is. I'm not even sure I completely know what a dab is.
Super concentrated THC in a wax form.
Now, is that the stuff they heat press out of,
Yes.
ounces of weed? Is that what
Correct.
So is that what a dab is? Is that like creamy stuff I've seen on the videos?
Yes.
They press out of there and then it just congeals.
Yep, it's practically
waxy.
yeah. It's not going up the stairs. It's just kicking yourself off of a building and getting high. And so I did that, and immediately I felt very uncomfortable, and because it was just that immediate.
Well, but you did a dab. That's like saying I'm going to have a drink to calm down and shoot in a fifth.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like maybe there's some middle ground there, bro.
So I go outside and I'm looking at the trees and like all the bright light is shining down on it, and I start having like those flickerings of geometry. Again, I'm like, I can't handle this right. I can't do this right now.
Dude, this is like the value drug. This is like a high if you had a coupon for it. You know what I mean? Like,
Right,
this
yeah.
is still going even after grandma eats your lunch.
Yeah.
Right to your face. Okay.
Exactly.
Please
And
continue with the beauty, sir. This is a gorgeous journey.
so then I'm like, I think it's time to take a break from weed and just be sober for a while. So I go sober for about 2 months, and I'm still having very emotional, crying episodes. And, this is when I started to realize,
Is it possible it was cannabis withdrawal? Were you a daily smoker?
I was. I actually did have withdrawal, and that's something I would love to talk about because a lot of people have this stigma that you don't experience withdrawal from cannabis, and I definitely did.
Okay.
I mean, nothing major, but like it was mostly cold sweats, jitters, like just
Sounds shitty.
yeah, it just wasn't fun. Like just how you would imagine coming off of any hard medication or
Anything.
Yeah, anything.
I mean, the stuff they give you at the hospital will put you in the street sucking dick for coke, right? Like, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
whatever it was, heroin that people are shooting up.
Oh yeah, and
So-
so I go on for a while, and then something that I was really looking forward to was revisiting with friends and getting my head straight. And
You said it had been a year, right? So now has it been about 14 months,
Right.
because it's a 2-month break?
right, and
Okay, cool.
it had been, and we had been getting ready to go to the Renaissance Fair, and
Where at?
Kansas City.
All right,
And
cool.
That's something I've always enjoyed. We've done it for years, and I think it was our 8th year going, so I was gonna have a good time. So we went up there, and we go back to that woo-woo and everything. So I'm taking a walk around the fairgrounds and whatever, and there's a tarot card lodge.
I like tarot.
Yeah, and for some reason, I'm like, damn, I'm getting really good vibes about this place. I need to go in there. So I go in, and I meet with one of the women, and she's just like, oh, would you like a reading? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. She's like, all right, just put your name here, and we'll get you with someone as soon as possible. So about 10 minutes go by, and I go in, and I meet this woman. Her name is Ellen. She's like this. She's an elderly woman, and I just feel this kindness and empathy coming off of her. Because after LSD, that's something I'd like to bring up, is that I became very hypersensitive to people.
Energies?
Energy in general. And
You can tell when somebody's actually like cool with you and your friend and cares what you're saying.
Exactly.
And then when there's somebody standing next to you at the grocery store that couldn't care less, right?
Oh.
Like you can actually tell that energy, but we're all putting on such a show, all those
Right.
masks we wear in public.
Well, that's the thing. Like, and I'm not trying to say it in like some kind of like egotistical, I gained the power or something, but
You're
like,
just hypersensitive to it
yeah,
after that, huh?
it's like
kind of beautiful.
Everybody's masks didn't work on me anymore.
Sure.
And so I sit down with her, and she's like, all right, hi, I'm Ellen, pleasure to meet you, etc. What I want you to do, because they have to keep it very quick in this environment because everybody's trying to get in there, and she's like, what I want you to do is take this deck, hold it in your hands, and just think about whatever you want to think about. So immediately I'm like, what the fuck was my acid trip? And I never had mentioned that to her, and so I give it back to her, and she's doing her thing, and she starts laying all these cards out, and immediately I see it in her face, like she's like wide-eyed, like what is going on? And she's like, because there are these things in the tarot called the major arcana, which are the big cards, and
Sure.
they're all coming out, and she just looks at me and she goes, you don't mess around, do you? I'm like, what are you talking
Interesting
about?
comment.
Yeah, I'm like, interesting. And she starts going through all of it, and all of a sudden she starts getting like really, really emotional with
Interesting.
me, and she's just like, I don't, and in speculation, it's sort of like, or being skeptical is like, oh, she probably does this to everyone. I'm like, but I wasn't thinking like that. I was completely open to the situation, and
Did you go in there as a skeptic, but hey, I'm at the Renaissance Fair, this seems fun? Or because of your experience with the psychedelic, were you a little more open-minded
I
to
was
it? And you're like,
definitely,
"Let's
yeah,
see."
I was definitely
Okay.
open to it.
So this is
and-
kind of an exciting moment for you.
Oh,
Like, let's see
absolutely.
what turns up on the cards, right?
Absolutely. And, she's looking at me, and I don't know if it was the literal truth or if for some reason it made me feel like I'm not crazy. She said, "You are magic. You are a magical being." And as soon as she said that, I
A
started
rabbit came out of your hat?
I started weeping. No, like
Really?
sobbing
So
in
you-
front of all of these strangers.
Okay.
Like
So this connected with you. This
Yes.
was for real.
I became super vulnerable and I started sobbing hard, and she hugged me.
Wow.
And like we stood there for solid few minutes, and she's like, "I want you to take my number and I want you to stay in touch with me." And
Well, she's psychic. She could see $50 bills in her future. No, I'm just kidding.
No,
You felt a genuine connection here in the sense of what, like a destiny? Like this is weeks after your experience,
yeah.
and yet this has been placed in your path again. This is intentional.
Absolutely. And,
Cool,
that's the thing. Like, it wasn't, "Oh, call me so we can have more readings." No, Ellen and I spoke for 2 years after that, and we became very dear friends of each other. And she helped me with in fact, that I saw her at the last time we went to the Renaissance, and we met each other again. And, I mean, we just... And
You have the story nobody has about psychics. You just legitimized it.
Right.
You
No.
know?
Yeah, like that's the whole thing. And she's actually what got me into practicing tarot. And I've been practicing for 2 years.
So it doesn't bother you that the history of tarot actually has no real meaning behind it. You feel like the meaning gets projected into the moment, and those are a vehicle.
Absolutely. Well, this is my whole view on it. So there are absolutely charlatans that will take advantage of you. Without a doubt. They'll just tell you what you want to hear. And I've met those people.
But how can there be non-charlatans for something that started out as like a board game?
Right.
You know what I mean? How could you be a real Monopoly future teller?
So the practice lies within what is called divination. Divination would be considered a school of magic, per se. You got your conjuration, observation, all of that. And I can't speak for any of those, but...
So are you learning magic now? Was this a turning point in this experience?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, tell me about that.
So I believe there is a huge misconception with a very fantasy view of magic. It's not you're going to shoot fireballs out of your hand or something. Like it's...
Expelliarmus.
Yeah, exactly. To me, it's...
I love those movies, by the way.
So we can talk about vibration and frequency and how these things affect us. That's exactly what magic is a transfer, deconstruction, and construction of energy.
That sounds like science.
Alchemy. Yeah.
So is it only magic in that there's aspects of it we don't understand why work? Or are you talking about genuine alchemy where you're trying to turn shit into gold? Which, by the way, I have some lead fishing weights that I would really like to entrust you with per that working out.
So in regards to that, I'm not too sure in the aspect of, is it real or is it something I'm giving so much belief to that it kind of creates its own power? Like, and when I do...
Placebo effect.
Right.
What are you trying to do with the magic? If you don't mind me jumping ahead, I don't know if you're there yet, but what are you trying to do with magic? Are you Wicca? Are you exploring this on your own? Did you go buy books? Like, you get opened up to the idea of magic. How does it actually enter your world physically?
So, for me, I'm going to backpedal a little bit. Because I think this is very important because it ties in with this. So, when I had experienced my psychedelia, and later on, when I was going on the internet and, trying to find everybody's trip reports, finding all the psychonauts, finding the whole community of spiritual people, per se, I began to notice something that was very common. Back when I was saying, after the whole thing, I felt like I was left with literally nothing and rebirth and all of that. I was a panicking, fearful child jumping into an abyssal ocean, trying to grab onto anything that would take me. I'm like, this is spiritual. This is, and it's just like grabbing onto all these things, even if I really have no belief in them, just trying to find something that makes me feel, okay, I'm a person.
So surely you end up walking into a church, right? I mean, we're in Missouri. We're a notch on the Bible Belt. This is the most religious-filled place I've ever experienced. in my everyday life, just walking around. So surely you end up walking into a church somewhere?
Not until later.
How much later? I'm just curious.
Probably 5-6 months. It was in the winter, and the winter, we'll get to that. But so I go into the church, and I actually meet with a familiar pastor who is an unbelievably open-minded individual.
And mind if I ask the church, just because
it was actually the Lake Ozark Christian Church, and
very cool. I know them well.
Unfortunately,
great folks.
Pastor, he had left about a year ago, and
remind me his name, Gary. Right?
Gary,
great.
And Gary was a very, very open-minded individual, and I have had conversations with him since I was a later teen.
That's great, man. That's cool.
So I went to him and I'm like, Gary, I tripped on LSD, and he's just like, oh really? And I said, yeah. And
what was his first question? I'm curious. From a pastor.
Well, he actually asked, what was it like?
Okay.
And I explained it to him, and he was very much on the whole, like, he kind of had like that very shamanistic view of it. He's like, people all over the world have done this for religious experiences and to have revelations, and he wasn't beating it into the ground. He's just like, he wasn't doing the don't do, like, one of my favorite things that Gary, since you do know him, I went sailing with him on his boat last year, and
cool.
And I was talking to him about faith, and he said, Casey, the problem with a lot of people, especially in this country, when it comes to faith and religion, they're stuck at a third grade level.
It's really interesting to hear him say that, because the journey that led to this show for me was that I suddenly felt like I had graduated from church. And I don't identify the same way anymore because of it. I didn't from that moment on. But that's kind of what started this journey for me. So I know Gary, so for context, this is what I consider a traditional Midwest pastor.
Sure.
Intelligent guy. I wouldn't have guessed he would have been quite this open-minded. So you haven't been attending his church to this point.
No.
This is just a spiritual person in your life. You had a spiritual moment.
Yeah.
You take this to him to unpack it maybe.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, I was seeking out anyone that I felt was, Ellen was sort of like the stepping stone. She was okay, there are people out there
who says this?
Pardon?
Who said that?
Ellen.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, so after I met her, it was sort of like okay, there are people I can talk to. And when I went back and talked to Gary, it really opened my eyes to the whole, like, you can take any faith, any religious, whatever, and I'm not trying to sound cynical about it, but on the large scale of people who attend these churches, it's not going to do a spiritual leader of any kind any good to really go in depth on these practices and ideas.
Yeah, let's be honest. Going to church on Sunday for the true seeker probably isn't much of a bite, right? It's the McDonald's of the foodie world. It's
Gary, and that's something Gary knew. Like, after Sunday service, then I would show up to the church just so I could sit with him and talk.
Okay.
Because you can go, like, just to stay on that little topic, because I think Christianity has a huge, huge stigma around it. It's the whole, gay people are bad, traditional marriage, smack, repent, sinful, when that is just such a piss-poor, watered-down conception and projection. Anyone who...
Of what?
Of Christianity. Anyone who takes ideas like that and really sinks that into their heart and thinks that's a true spiritual message, they actually need to read the Bible.
Well, don't take this the wrong way. There are guys that are smarter than both of us put together, phenoms in their industry, and their industry happens to be Bible study. And I'm going to say I think they would disagree with you, that if you just follow what's in the book, if you just put the book in a blender and pour it out, it's pretty clear what you can and can't do. I don't personally believe that there's any real arguments to be made for areas of gray where homosexuality is actually okay according to the Bible. Now, it's okay with me. We're not talking about my personal beliefs.
Sure.
But according to the book, I do think it's unfortunate that a lot of really open-minded people that maybe just need to part ways with the dogma of the Bible altogether try to bend it to fit them. In all honesty, Christianity is pretty well laid out. The facts and rules of it are not really open to negotiation.
Considering most of the books are actually not in the Bible.
Well, most of the books of what, though? I agree with you, but be specific for people.
Well, I mean, we'll take, for example, the book of Enoch.
Sure.
So the book of Enoch is a huge problem for me that it's not in the Bible, and the book of Judas. Most people are unaware a Gospel of Judas even existed.
So you disagree with the canonization. But how does that affect your life? I'm asking you because we could have a whole separate 4-hour podcast about the historicity of the Bible, but how does it affect you in your journey?
It doesn't affect me personally so much as I think people who commit their lives to any form of doctrine or dogma should take the latter and actually understand it. Because the thing about the Bible is that it's filled with wonderful contradictions to itself.
I've heard it argued both ways. I would say the scholars would say they could prove it has no contradictions. What do you think they are?
Well, so very few people are unaware that there are actually 2 creation stories and 2 versions of God in the first 3 pages of Genesis.
I actually happen to be aware of that myself. It was written that way intentionally, wasn't it? The story's told twice from 2 different perspectives for a reason. I don't recall, so I mean, if you know, please tell me.
Whether or not whatever the original intention was, I'm not sure. But, for example, there is a human God and there is a very divine God.
Are you saying this is your personal belief, or are you talking
No,
about
no.
in Genesis?
I'm saying in Genesis, this is how it is written.
Sure.
So
not the Trinity?
No. Because, so it says specifically, God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden and knew exactly where he was at all times. A few words later, God descended to the Garden of Eden and asked, Adam, where are you?
Okay.
So that is 2 different aspects of God.
What if it's just how he talks?
Right. Well,
you walk in the front door, your kid's playing, you're like, where are you, boy? I mean, it was more a turn of phrase than it was you should be hanging on every little word because it matters.
I think it would be very counterproductive and unwise to spend the first bit of a creation story saying that a God is all-powerful and omnipotent and then making him appear human.
Well, that was sort of the point of Christianity, right?
Not until the New
God
Testament.
In the flesh. Well, but that was part of the story that just wasn't told yet. It was always destiny, right? But let me ask you, because again, we could unpack the Bible endlessly. Well, but on this journey, because you're with a Christian pastor here in Missouri,
sure.
How's it relevant to this story? Because the truth of the Bible, like how's this affecting your journey at this point? Because I know it connects.
The Bible or any work of faith, like the Tao Te Ching in Taoism, the Bible, the Quran, the
Vedas,
the Vedas, all of it. They, at the end of the day, they are all stories about people believing something higher than themselves and people who left society to find their own truth. And that's something that most holy scriptures, I think, very much speak about. I mean, you can look at anyone, Siddhartha, the Buddha. You can look at Jesus, Muhammad, all of the various spiritual figures throughout the Bible and many other works. All of these people were not accepted. Very few of them were accepted.
Don't you think that's natural, though? Somebody shows up and says, I'm the way, the only way, I have the truth, you don't have it, you have to do this through me. Of course that's not accepted. Like, who the fuck are you? I'm just pushing my apple cart.
Sure, I mean, that's absolutely valid, but it also goes to show that the path to what people would consider... Me personally, I don't believe true enlightenment actually exists.
Really?
No, not at all.
Are we going somewhere after this? You believe in a soul?
I believe there are many... Yes, I believe in the idea of a soul.
Okay.
I believe...
Do you believe we have one?
Yes, and in whatever language you want to put it, like...
Sure. But so no enlightenment for that soul? Like, it is what it is, and the concept of enlightenment is just, here we are as this thing called a human existence, and that's a concept that's very much a human construct. That's what you're saying?
No, I think I can word this better if I ask you, do you believe enlightenment exists?
Absolutely.
What do you believe enlightenment is?
I've actually decided, at least this is my operating theory at this point, that the only thing we're here to do is evolve our soul.
Sure.
Now, you could say that's for God. You could say that that's for divination because you want to become a god. There's a lot of religious beliefs out there, right? I feel like that they're all lightning bugs rubbing up against the same bulb. Like, they're just looking in different windows of the same house. The core gut punch that we all sense is that you're here to be a good person because it matters somewhere. Right? So you can apply that to whatever your system of belief is if you want in interpreting me. But my point is, yes, I believe I have a soul, and I believe it has a ledger.
Okay.
So,
well, I guess, so when it comes to enlightenment, I think the way that enlightenment is often perceived is it's figured out. We know. It's sort of, enlightenment in the definition to me is an end-all be-all. And it goes back to what I said in the very beginning. Finish line on an infinite path. So we'll talk.
So you're saying enlightenment would be like reaching an arbitrary truck stop in an infinite universe. It's like you haven't really arrived anywhere.
Sure. And I mean,
maybe that's enlightenment, though, is realizing that.
Then I
don't know. I don't think I have it. I didn't have all my teeth.
I think enlightenment could be a very arbitrary thing. Like, for example, we'll talk about the Buddha. So the Buddha lived in his palace for 29 years before he even knew what the outside world was.
Yeah, that was the whole journey of the Buddha, right?
Exactly. And so he went out and he originally spent, I don't think they were sadhus, but they were a type of, they were a school of Hinduism that was into flagellation and the whole suffering of the body and repentance and,
People certainly do hate themselves, right?
Yeah, and that's what they were doing to, cleanse themselves. And the story is that for 8 years, the Buddha survived on 1 grain of rice a day until one day...
Do you believe that literally?
Based on what I've seen some yogis do, I think it could be entirely possible.
Like, you think a physical guy that was a prince, he exists, he was a real dude, he sat there and he ate a grain of rice a day for show, he was sustaining on some kind of different energy, otherworldly vibration, something.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The reason I believe in this is because we'll talk about vitamin B12, for example. Vitamin B12 is an incredibly essential vitamin to the body. I mean, it's responsible for DNA growth, blood cell reproduction, all of that. You need it to live. B12 deficiency will, without a doubt, maybe not kill you, but make your life very miserable. So all the way up until, I want to say the 16th, 17th century, maybe actually much later than that. Don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure. But there was a point in time where you could go outside and get your B12 from just being in nature alone. Putting your hand in the dirt, getting like the air, all of it. Vitamin B12 was essentially everywhere until once the big industrial ages began. That was deplenished. Now you have to get your B12 from legitimate sources, most of which is animal products or supplementation.
Is that such a bad thing, though? I mean, you used to also be outside in that same sunshine air and get fucking dysentery. So,
right.
I mean, I understand your point. Like, we've certainly done some negative things, but you're saying, like, because of pollution, we're not getting our vitamins the same way because maybe we've changed the ionosphere kind of thing.
I'm saying that in the past, I think it was, if you knew how to take care of yourself, I think it would be a lot more plausible to live in a very extreme way with a better chance of survivability.
What do you consider an extreme way? Like, I consider just take away our houses and grocery stores pretty fucking extreme.
Yeah, that would be very extreme.
If I have to take that axe I have in my garage and create shelter for my loved ones, that would be pretty extreme. Roll that odometer for me. Where are we at?
Yeah, and I mean, back to the example of the Buddha, I would consider, going out every day, eating very minimalistic and causing literal pain to your body for some idea that you'll obtain enlightenment that way is a very extreme and probably it's very hard to understand.
But so you don't believe the stories of Jesus, which I can understand. Fine, sure, because those sound a little exaggerated. They sound very human to say that, like, he was killed and then there was an earthquake. It's very easy to go backwards in time on paper and just claim these things happened. But you think that the Buddha, though, literally ate a grain of rice a day. And so how does that
So-
lead into his beliefs.
So I think one day, I think
that?
the story of the Buddha could really be summed up as a man saying this is all bullshit. And that's essentially what he did. He looked around, he's like, we're suffering, we're killing ourselves, and for what?
Yeah, humanity's terrible.
We're not living.
Yeah.
This is terrible. And then he went off, and I always forget the name of the tree he sat underneath, allegedly where he received enlightenment, and he believed that he received enlightenment when he saw human kindness. So we'll go back to what you were saying. He sat up in the morning, and a woman was passing by, and she had a bowl of rice porridge, and she looked at the Buddha, and he just looked as terrible as you could imagine, and she's like, would you like some food? And in that moment, he saw that gesture. That is the gift of humanity.
And
so
that's meaningful to you. That's big.
yeah, I think that's very huge because, I mean, I think it has less to do with these spiritual or even mythological figures, but I think it's all about, people have to go through, in my opinion, very detrimental
Bad experiences.
Yes,
difficulties.
I think it's I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's incredibly rare that anyone in this life can go through blissfully without true pain and obtain
Growth comes from discomfort.
yes. And
Yeah, some guys are born with good genetics, and you're going to have
Sure.
like what would be considered a nice body.
Right.
You're going to fuck around and look like a bodybuilder unless you go pick up heavy
Well,
stuff.
yeah.
So you got to do the heavy lifting, and it has to hurt for growth.
Well, even on that, I think that's a beautiful topic because, the fitness industry, in my opinion, is one of the biggest liars and deceivers on the planet.
Oh, of course.
And-
I'm going to take a bunch of steroids, and I'm
Yeah.
going to get jacked, and then I'm going to tell you I did it with this fluffy fruit drink,
Right.
and I'm going to sell you that because I look like this. But just kidding, that had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and
Yeah, but we all know that they've been selling snake oil for 50 years, right?
Sure, and I mean, that's something. So my favorite, to kind of U-turn that subject onto bodybuilding for a moment, my favorite bodybuilder of all time is Frank Zane.
Cool.
And Frank Zane, I bought most of his books and I read through them, and what fascinated me the most about him wasn't necessarily his bodybuilding, but the fact that he was very critical on these mentalities of, that tunnel vision and the power of mantra, and I mean your whole motto of do the hard things. Like, if you abide by those mantras, you can truly get something out of it. But what he was so critical on was the objective is to be healthy and potentially build a masterpiece out of yourself. He was never giving off this gimmick that, oh, if you train this way, if you eat this way, you will look like this. Not saying you'll look like me, but you may never look like this. And that
Looking good's a benefit of health, right?
Right. Yeah.
The reason it's attractive to us is the way that person looks
Sure.
is an indicator of health, which makes them potentially a better breeding partner.
Right.
So that's what we're doing with attractions, evaluating health, right?
Sure. And so to switch back that whole thing on health, which is where I want to go with all of this, is because after all of my psychedelic experiences and whatever have you, there was a moment last year where I had smoked, and there's a lot of speculation that whatever it was, it could have been laced.
Laced with what? I always like to ask that.
I have no idea.
Because it's more expensive to give people a drug, and it's a lot riskier for them to give somebody a drug that they've had to go out and get other substances for, and you would normally charge more for that. So like when people say that something's laced, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I think it's a lot more likely that somebody drank too much than got roofied, and I always wonder about the lace. And the reason I'm not challenging you, I'm not questioning you on it. It's that I'd really like to know before you describe this to us whether this could have been just cannabis.
Well, like I said, it was speculation that it could have been laced. I mean,
it was intense.
Right, and
Hit me.
it could have truly just been my wiring or whatever, but long story short, I took about 3 puffs, and what started out as a chronic body high became some anxiety. Next thing I know, I'm experiencing panic. And then panic started to turn into terror because I felt as though whether it was truly a physical phenomenon or that I had psyched myself out so hard, I lost complete feeling of my tongue.
Okay.
And
sounds like it'd be freaky.
It was without a doubt, without exaggeration, the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. I was holding my tongue outside of my mouth, trying to just feel around with it, and I'm like, I'll go drink some mouthwash. Maybe this is some chronic, like, fucking dry mouth or something. So I'm drinking the mouthwash, I'm swishing it around, I spit it back out, nothing. So I'm like, I'm going to take a really hot shower to just feel my body. I go in there, take a hot shower, nothing's happening. I go back out. Terror turns into doom. I'm thinking I'm going to have a brain hemorrhage and die. I am freaking out so hard, and it feels like reality itself is falling apart.
The I'm going to die weed trip.
I'm gonna die.
I've heard fable.
And I remember pleading out, screaming and crying to make it stop. And eventually it did, and surprisingly, I made a phone call. Even though when I talked, it scared the living shit out of me because I have no idea what's going on.
Did you call your uncle so your grandma couldn't hear this time?
I actually called Ellen.
Okay, cool.
And I called Ellen, and the first thing I said was, Ellen, have you ever been so high you lost complete feeling of your tongue? And she goes, no. and
she's honest.
And we start talking, and eventually I get calmed down. She calmed me down, and it was after this experience, I went to sleep. I woke up with a horrid headache, and I went to work. And the whole time I'm at work, I'm like, all right, I need to stop smoking. I feel like, in a way, it was the plant itself saying, you've gotten everything you can out of me. Stop being greedy. You're not going to find it. You need to deal with whatever it is you're going through right now.
You're the fourth guy to tell me that in 3 months. I counted after we talked so that I would know before this talk. And what I find interesting is the common thread running through you gentlemen in this case. I don't have a lot of female friends, haven't heard anything like this. You guys are all seekers. You were already looking. This was a tool. This cannabis, this LSD, whatever you were experimenting with, was a tool to look in corners you hadn't lit up yet. Right. And I have heard people say, whether in summation or literally like you just did, the plant kind of gave me all it could, and I reached a point where I was either smoking to be normal or I just wasn't feeling anything anymore. And it sounds like that's what you reached.
Oh, and that was...
How recent was that, by the way, if you don't
That
mind?
was... Hell, probably 2 months ago, a year. Yeah. And so a few months had gone by, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to try and smoke again. And so I was smoking like once a week with my friend, and it was fine. Nothing was bad. And then in January, about 2 weeks into January, I go back to one of my old roommates, and I'm like, hey, man, can I smoke with you? And I took one puff, and I was sitting there on his couch, and all of a sudden start getting really, really bad, like just signals. And
How do you mean signals? Vibes from somebody?
Yeah, just the entire, like, myself. Like, I was kind of having, like, a loss of control. I was, like, getting into a bad, deep headspace.
Okay.
And I kind of hear my own internal dialogue. Not like I'm hearing voices, but I just, like how you narrate to yourself. But, like, I just hear myself go, the question, do you fear death? And
is that a big deal for you? Is that a thing you've been pondering?
Well, it wasn't until that happened, because as soon as that happened, as soon as that thought traced my mind, I freaked out. Like, I had a full-blown anxiety attack. I looked at my friend, I'm like, I gotta go. I need to go home. I left, and then
You do a lot of driving during being fucked up.
Yes, I do.
Stop that.
I
feel like I'm having a full-blown anxiety attack. I can't get off this couch. Give me my car keys. Drive a big truck, do you?
No.
It's always you on the road behind me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just fucking with you.
So, 7 months in, I'm just on this spiral. And then...
7 months in on not smoking.
I'm not smoking, but I'm still having chronic anxiety all the time.
You think it's from the LSD, like a brain chemistry change? Is that what's happening here?
I don't know. Sometimes I convince myself that's what it was. Sometimes I think maybe it was just chronic anxiety. Maybe it was just too many head games with myself. And then it got so bad in this year's July, I was just like, I was having thoughts of, am I real? Are these people real? Is this reality real? Is anything real? Is this all a figment? Am I in a simulation? Does any of this matter? And I was so afraid of this. So I go online and I'm like, what am I going through right now? So I discovered something called derealization and depersonalization. And I found
these are concepts. These are self-help books.
These are.
What are we talking
This is a diagnosis. This is something people have actually and still some.
Who would diagnose this? Psychologists,
psychiatrists, and
they would tell you have what?
They would either say DP or DR, which is derealization or depersonalization disorder.
I've heard about this before. People that go through their whole day and they don't feel like they affect anything, and they start to wonder, like, was I really there? Did I have the conversation?
Correct.
Like, Aiden hasn't said anything to me in half an hour. Did I die? Am I sitting here?
Right. And there were many times.
Fuck that guy.
And there were many times where I was, going to friends' houses or leaving work, and as I'm driving, I'm like, was that real? Was any of that real? And that had persisted to where life was no longer life to me. I wasn't living. Talking, breathing, eating, drinking. The only thing that brought me peace was sleep. It was the only thing that would relieve me from that torture. And every day I was waking up, it was a constant battle to hold it together until finally I started going to therapy. And what led to that was the most liberating moment I have had all year, when I walked out and quit my job.
Okay, so I want to hear that, but let me jump in here and say this. I have to let my producer have a Saturday night, right? We've been going at it for a couple of hours, and I don't feel like you and I can unpack everything all at once. But before we wrap it up, would you come back and expand on this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just come back and talk some more. If we were going to wrap this up right now and we wanted to sort of condense in summation, you just brought it back around full circle to where we started unpacking our initial conversation when I ran back into you, which was you were questioning what reality is.
Yeah.
Do you mean that in a physical sense, a metaphysical sense, just a life experience sense? What's real to me? What's real to everybody? Are you talking about your brain hallucinating consciousness? Like, what level do you mean that on? And where's that brought you to right now? Where's Casey at as a human existence right now today? What do you believe? What's your journey? What are you looking for?
Right now, I believe there are forces at hand that I cannot explain. Forces that, whether they are part of a physical reality or outside of it, and I believe that I personally, regardless of all of my experience, drug-induced or not, I believe what I'm going through right now, I think a great many people worldwide are going through right now. It has been for various reasons, a very questioning and chaotic time frame for a lot of people. And right now, a lot of people, their livelihoods, family connections, dreams, aspirations, all of that is either being put on hold or being destroyed. So I think right now, a lot of people are going through questioning of reality.
What is reality?
Yeah, what is reality?
What do we believe? What's on the media? What's out our front door? What do we hold dear?
And I think for me personally, it's where do I fit in?
Isn't that what everybody's asking?
Yeah, precisely.
All the time, though, right?
Yeah.
2020, I think, brought a lot of things to light, and I think it sort of intensified, put a spotlight on that journey that everybody's on.
Right.
I keep using that word because it really is. You don't ever arrive at a destination in life. It's strange. I even had buddies that went to the gym and were very focused and very dedicated, and they arrived at this great physique, and they thought you graduated, that stayed there, and they were done. And they don't look like that anymore. And that's why I realized life was, you don't get success and get money in the bank and get a dope car in the driveway and then you're good. You got to pay that bill again next month.
Yeah.
And don't you want a cooler car next year? And don't you want a bigger house at some point, or whatever drives you, right? You're on a spiritual journey the same way I am. And I'm really grateful you come be on my show because you're seeking hard. But sum up some things for me. Psychedelics, should they be illegal?
No.
Should cannabis be illegal?
No.
I got to be honest, even though I know you had a profound awakening because of it, if I just listen to this episode of this vodcast, you make a pretty good case for psychedelics being kind of bad. Like, not bad in terms of society and legalization. I mean, like, you didn't portray very good experiences. It sounds like it was rough and raw and gut churning, but like epiphanies came out of it. Were you saying that in a positive light, like it was worth it? Or is it like, damn, that was a bear. That was tough.
I don't think I can universally speak for it for anyone, because first and foremost, I believe psychedelics are tools, and that includes weed. Weed is very much a psychedelic. And I just think that people should have the option to do it, but I believe there is right now, a lot of people are pressing for the legalization of cannabis and various psychedelics, and I don't have any issues with that. I just very much believe that we should not stick to one side, because if you go back throughout history, I don't want to make it sound ancient, but there are many people that shouldn't be discredited just because they're not getting as much light as other people are. Like, the people who are advocating, the people should also focus as much light on the other medical side effects, because I'm a very firm believer that in our lifetime we will begin to see the negative effects of cannabis and psychedelic use.
I've heard only in recent times a really solid case made for how cannabis might, yes, undoubtedly have medicinal uses, and it was always a farce of justice to try and put it on Schedule 1, right?
Well, no,
that's a Schedule 1 substance with no medicinal value. Really, are you sure?
Right.
Because we're pretty positive that that's the most medicinally useful product that's on any of these schedules, right, that they've got listed. Cannabis is the stuff of fairy tales compared to heroin, right?
No, absolutely. And, it definitely, people shouldn't experience like insane punishment for these things, like crazy sentences or anything like that.
But that gets into a whole thing with privatized prisons and quotas and dollars. It's all dollars.
I just express a caution. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is by Carl Jung: "Be cautious of unearned wisdom."
Amen. That's
like
a great quote.
When you use these things, whether they be substance or not, you have to understand that our consciousness, our minds, are as infinite as the universe. And just because you may feel great and conquering to yourself, you will encounter things that you never knew existed. And when you encounter them, you may experience great sacrifice. And I'm not saying these things to...
Is it worth it?
I don't know yet.
So let's stop right there, because I have a feeling that you're one of those people that's going to be a presence on this show. This podcast is going to get really consistent. We want to put a lot of content out there because there seems to be this growing tsunami of emotionally charged energy out there in the world. They've got us going on everything. They keep releasing pictures of aliens, and we're coming off coronavirus, and we all know the stories, right? But I have a feeling you're somebody that's going to come on this show multiple times. I'm sure people want to hear about somebody that's seeking as hard as you. We didn't even talk about prepping.
Right.
We didn't get into a lot of cool topics. I'd like to have you on one of our prep episodes. That's going to be really cool. So in the meantime, are you out there on your social media?
No, I
tell people how to reach you.
I don't use social media.
God bless you, soldier. Yeah, I stay off that stuff. We're going to do a bunch of it for the show, but me personally, I don't have any interest in that stuff. So kudos from me anyway, my opinion. So, well, Casey, thanks a lot for coming out, brother. Seriously, thank you for sharing your journey with us.
My pleasure.
I consider this the most important thing any of us are here to do, and I don't know what the answers are, so I appreciate you sharing your opinions with us. So,
well, thank you for listening.
I'm always going to listen, and I hope you'll come back and tell us some more. So.
Absolutely.
All right, brother. Thank you for this.
Absolutely.
Great to see you, man. Till next time, everybody.